RSA offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk and designed to effectively detect and respond to advanced attacks, manage user access control, and reduce business risk, fraud, and cybercrime. For a limited time, get mobile multi-factor authentication from RSA Secure ID Access for free to help secure your remote or dynamic workforce long-term. Leverage push notification, biometric, and one-time password authenticators to secure access to your cloud applications, on-premises systems, legacy systems, privileged accounts, and more at no cost for 6 months. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/RSA Security.
Welcome back to Security Compliance Weekly. This is episode 35, where we've been talking to Brian Tremblay, compliance practice leader at Onapsis, about his path to enlightenment about security and compliance, where he came from a strictly auditing background. Before we get back to the discussion and hopefully talk about how to solve some of these problems we've been discussing, I do have a couple announcements. First, we at Security Weekly Productions are looking for high-quality guest suggestions for all of our podcasts to fill our Q3 recording schedule. If you have an idea of topics or people that you think we should be talking to, submit your suggestions by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review these suggestions pretty much as we receive them, and we'll get back to you if we want to take you up on the suggestion. Also, you can register for our upcoming webcasts and virtual trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/webcasts, or you can visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view the archive of our previously recorded webcasts and trainings. All right. So, getting back to the discussion, I was making the comment that, maybe there's something, even though, I personally, maybe it's a true confession, sort of scoff at the auditors that came into this field and thought, why, what business does an auditor have playing any kind of role in security? But wanting to acknowledge that, okay, they are good at something, and one of the things that they're good at is walking down the path of following the processes and talking to the people and methodologies and things like that, which I, for one, think is something that's sorely missing in today's world that we live in, at least from a compliance perspective. Any thoughts on that, Brian? Pushback, agreement, disagreement? Go wherever you want, because we're focusing on the playlist for karaoke, frankly.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the candor on that, but I guess I'll just keep talking, and you stop me when you've nailed down your list, and we can go to the next question.
All right, sounds good.
So definitely agree with the comment on, hey, they're pretty good at people and process. But I think what's really interesting when you think about an auditor in the role that they sit in, it's that, like, if we talk about my career in internal audit, for example, so typically, report, administratively to someone in the C-suite, CFO, CEO, or whatever, but then also have that independent kind of reporting relationship into the board. So when I think about what the best part of my role was as an auditor, it was that reporting relationship. And when I looked at the things that I could do to best help the organization, it was kind of leaning on the fact that I reported into those people, right? You've got the leadership team basically driving how the organization does things, and you've got the board overseeing to make sure that the leadership team is doing their job. So when I think about what's the best role that an auditor could play in security, it's definitely not becoming a security expert. Like that's not a viable solution, at least in the short term, unless you're kind of committing a career to it or committing some resources to it. It's learning from security, learning from IT, the CISO's organization, enough to be dangerous to talk to the leadership team and the board about these types of risks. So when I think about some of the best audits that I ever participated in, were ones where I could get budget for security to do something that they needed to do, where they were, highlighting a risk that was getting axed from a budgetary perspective. And then I could come in and do some work, do an audit, understand the process, understand the risk, communicate that risk, and then get them some funding. So when I think about, audit and an internal audit in particular, I think there's massive value there. There's the relationships, from an external audit perspective, it's got to be a little bit more clear cut with independence rules and regulations and things like that. But again, they have direct access to the board. That's part of, being in that seat. So even from an external audit perspective, I think they should be, leveraging those relationships as they see these risks and understand these risks a little bit more to make sure the board's educated on those risks. Because unfortunately, sometimes in organizations, they hide risks from the board. But when I look at audit and auditors in particular in that organization, I think that's an incredible value proposition to be able to, elevate these types of things to senior management and the board. And look, it's not easy, right, to do these types of things. And a lot of auditors kind of wimp out in showing the board and senior leadership these risks. But if an auditor is doing their job, that's what they should be doing. So when I think about the role, I think that's one of the biggest parts is you leverage their knowledge of the process and understanding the process, maybe documenting the process, flesh out the risks that exist in that process, and then you communicate them upward to make sure that management and the board, see them, are aware of them, and then do something to mitigate them.
Hey, Brian. Go ahead.
Just real quick question. What I'm hearing you say, and I just want to get you to weigh in on this, in the form of a question, who do you think is more likely to get the attention of the board or the C-suite? Is it a security professional, whatever capacity they hold, or somebody that's coming from the audit side?
So I think it's going to be audit because, again, if you're in a publicly traded company, there's a requirement there that your auditor report into the board. That's not to say that a security professional can't do it, but the CISO role, let's just generically use that as kind of the leader of security, even though they may flow into like IT or some other role. They may have to get past 1, 2, or 3 levels of management to even get to senior management. Unfortunately, I've seen CISOs that, are like manager level people in an IT organization. And that type of role is not going to get to senior management easily. And it's almost assured to not get to the board. I think what I'm seeing that's effective is when you also give that CISO role access into part of the board. So like internal audit has direct access to the audit committee, right? The CISO role, and I'd advise every organization to have some type of security kind of committee sitting on their board. The CISO role should have a direct line into that committee, but the reality is they don't, but in all cases. But a head of audit, and certainly in a publicly traded company, is required to have that independent, reporting line into the board. So they may not be the most qualified person to talk about these risks, but they're going to be the person that has the easiest access to senior management and the board to get the discussion going around these risks. And then they can bring in, that CISO or security role that might, be a few levels down in the organization, if that's unfortunately how the organization views security.
John, you had a question?
I do. Thank you. So where the rubber meets the road ultimately is when something bad happens, who gets sued and for what? So my question is, when you get an outside auditor to come in and sign off on your security, what exactly are they promising? Or what exactly are they assuring? And second question, when a company gets popped, does the auditor customarily get sued, sometimes get sued, almost never get sued? And if so, for what?
So to answer your first question, so I'll just confirm, we're talking about like your outside auditor, right? The one who's coming in and performing an audit to the benefit of, an investor, be it a shareholder of the company in the publicly traded markets or a bank or something like that. So
I presume it's the third party who's coming in and confirming that you're in compliance with, ABC protocol, sure, whatever applicable protocol it is.
Yep. So the the one line that they're going to put in their opinion or their report, or the two lines that they're going to put in there, are going to be something around reasonable assurance. So no auditor is going to put, hey, we provide absolute assurance that you're in compliance with GDPR, your financial statements are not materially misstated. They're going to say, hey, legalese, we come in, we look at what we look at. We can't look at everything, so we provide you reasonable assurance that you're compliant with whatever. So that's my view on the first question, and it's directly related to my second question, which is they don't typically get sued because what they hand over to a lawyer who says, hey, like, we think we're going to sue you too because you just did an audit, is they hand over the contract that says, hey, we didn't sign up to audit everything. We have no way to know if management, is giving us everything or being honest. So we do the best we can to provide that reasonable assurance. And as a result, you can try and sue us, but you're probably not going to win. So,
one thing I would add to what you just said, and by the way, thank you, that's very interesting, is the fact of the matter is there are not that many lawyers who know enough about security and technology to even, undertake that investigation. Mm-hmm. And so I would imagine, and this is just my own unsolicited opinion, but I would imagine that auditors will get sued more often when, just like if there's a big financial fraud discovered, right? Like if there's an Enron, I mean, the auditor obviously got sued there. So I would think that would become more commonplace as the legal profession becomes more aware of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, Enron's super interesting because basically the auditor was in cahoots with management. So that's why Anderson got, broken apart and disappeared, basically, other than from somebody buying the name, was because the auditors at best were implicit in the scheme. At worst, they were helping perpetuate it. So that's kind of the rub on Enron. But you're right, this is going to get dicier and dicier. And as I think about, as I talk about the impacts of security to, auditors, one of the other groups that I've kind of had in the back of my mind is, I think lawyers would be interested to learn a little bit more about this topic and the risks that it presents. So I'm not quite sure I'm there yet, but I do think, lawyers are a stakeholder group that should definitely know more about this, and should appreciate, how security risks, ultimately could manifest into litigation, either defending it or attacking an organization that's had some type of security problem. So.
Well, after the call, maybe we can talk about putting together a CLE or a lunch and learn, because I have a lot of contacts, obviously, among law firms, and I'm sure that this topic would be of great interest, particularly in today's environment where the security problem has just gotten exponentially more difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, and for me, what I like to do is just show something like the Recon vulnerability, and just show how that works and shows what it can do, and then just open it up and say, hey, I just showed you, something that is internet facing, that if your client or someone you're looking to sue for a breach has this thing. Like, what do you do with it, right? I ask that question to auditors all the time, like audit partners or heads of audit. I said, hey, if you've got a vulnerability or a misconfiguration that allows complete full system compromise, like, what do you do with that information? And a lot of times it just kind of facilitates an interesting discussion, and you can see their kind of gears turning, trying to understand it, and figure out what it all means. And if you show them like the videos or the content that show it actually happens, and show that it's real, like, then they really start thinking about, wow, what does this mean for my organization? So I'd absolutely be happy to do that.
So there's a much bigger problem that you guys are touching on, and that issue is that tech people don't speak business, and business, compliance, legal, and executives have a really hard time interpreting tech, right? And it's not so much that they don't know it; it's just that they don't have vision into it, right? So by doing the vulnerability program through Onapsis, right? How is Onapsis taking what it's finding and trying to parlay it into solving the problem of, hey, you have issues, you need to talk to your tech people, or hey, you have issues, you need to talk to your executives, business people. What is Onapsis? What is your outreach? How are you trying to further engage that communication? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we do it two ways. So first and foremost, one of the things that I've been doing since I joined Onapsis is pulling apart the security results and actually attaching business impacts to it. So rather than having a very technical description of what the issue is and what the fix is, it's really, hey, here's what could happen because you have this issue. So, hey, this could result in, anyone on your network shutting down your ERP. And when that happens, your business basically stops. At least the transactional part of your business stops. So that's one way that we do it. The second way that we do it is, we start interfacing with our prospects and our customers, through our weekly touch points or through our, complimentary risk assessment readouts, to say, hey, here's the business impact, of these 1,000 misconfiguration issues or these 500, code and transport issues. Here's what they really mean to your business. Here's what the implications are to your business. So you're dead right. It's part of probably the biggest challenge out there is how do you take audit and compliance and security speak and homogenize it into business speak, so that when you get someone like a CFO who has a vested interest in audit compliance, financial reporting and all that stuff, has no clue about anything, generally speaking, in security, will not understand a technical, word that you put in front of them. How do you show them the risks? It's through that business impact. So spot on. That's what we're doing.
I understand. Look, I understand implicit trust, right? You hire people, you trust them to do the job, you trust what they're telling you, right? And then a breach happens and you go back to what they told you and it's like, well, why should I trust you in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So Onapsis is really in the driver's seat to take what it's seeing from other businesses, as well as what businesses are relying on, like SAP, right? And drive into those businesses and say, look, executives, we've got a problem here. You need to talk to your tech people. Here's what you need to know. And here's the discussion that you need to have. Is that along the lines of what Onapsis is up to?
Yep, it's certainly part of the discussion, right? So, ultimately, the product, is used by organizations to identify, monitor, mitigate, and manage risk, right? That's just kind of what the product itself does. But part of that story is the educational piece. It's pulling in those kind of disparate stakeholders. We really are trying to leverage kind of what our tech does to help create those dialogues, help create those stories, to kind of pull those kind of disparate groups together, security, IT, finance, supply chain, and say, hey, we all need to get in and look at this ERP together because we all care about very different things. And all of those different things create unique risks. And maybe we don't have a very good lens into the risks that we have. So, typically we don't facilitate, those internal discussions necessarily. We rely on partners and implementers to kind of help our customers use the tool the way that they should be. But as part of the prospecting and onboarding piece, it's raising these discussions to make sure that the organizations are thinking about it, in the way that they should, and really appreciating that what we're generating are business risks and not only security risks.
Right. Now, let me ask you this. When we were talking leading up to this interview, you were saying if you're a CFO, you should be watching this, right? How does what Onapsis is doing, right? How does that translate into CFO value?
So one of the beautiful things that Enron did and WorldCom and others is it spawned SOX, as we all know, but everyone talks about 404, right? That's internal control or financial reporting. It's what the auditor's opinions are of it. But if you're publicly traded, Section 302 is management certification to the financial statements and controls. And what that means is the CEO and the CFO literally sign their names on the dotted line. They open themselves up to personal liability in the event of an issue. So first and foremost, I would say, hey, in the event of an issue, you should know that you're signing your name on the dotted line. So if you don't understand and care about these risks, you're just asking for trouble. The second thing is those actual internal controls, right? So like I mentioned earlier, and like we talked about before, all we're really seeing from a security perspective is manifestation of access control and change management risk to be, general, that we see in SOX and internal controls or financial reporting. So you may look at change management through tickets, right? So, hey, a business user requests a change, yes, we see that. Someone developed the change. Yep, we see that. The user tested the change and it worked. Yep, we see that. Someone pushed it into production, and presumably you have separation of duties between, dev and production. The user signed off, everyone was happy, and audit passed. Nowhere in that process does anyone actually look at the code, right? Nobody's auditing the change. You're auditing the documentation through a ticket of that change. You're not auditing the change. And I can tell you from experience in reviewing customer scans and prospect scans, there's a lot of stuff that goes right at Sarbanes-Oxley, access control and change management that people put in their coding. We've seen people creating revenue reports, and every time that report's run, that report gets sent to a Gmail account, right? Why would somebody do that? I don't know. I could speculate, insider trading maybe. But the thing is once it's in that line of code, it's in that code forever. That in person could be, there, write the code and leave the next day, or could be a third party writing that code, right? That's a very common practice, putting that in, and nobody's going to detect that. Nobody's going to raise the question and go, why is that line of code in there? Like, what's the business justification for that line of code being in there? And there's far, far worse stuff. Like I mentioned, disabling authorization checks, right? Somebody could write a line of code that says, hey, like if this user tries to access the vendor master table, let them in, even though they don't have access. So I guess long story short, and I know I'm getting a little bit specific, a CFO should care about it because those are things that impact your internal controls or financial reporting, that bypass access control, change management control, that they just don't know about, they're not aware about. And, part of my job, and I think, those that play in the compliance space and security space like you guys, is to help educate, help show them that these risks exist, and then ultimately help them deal with these risks, whether it's through, technology or consulting, actually both. So that's why I think a CFO should care, because, it goes right after compliance.
Right. Now, is there a place where people can go if they want to see a platform demo of Onapsis?
Yeah, of course, just go to our website, onapsis.com. Like I mentioned before, we do offer free assessments. We offer, a cyber assessment focused mostly on security. We offer an operational resiliency assessment, which is basically, hey, like how robust is your environment, in the event of, potentially going down. And we offer the audit efficiency assessment, which is basically, hey, how can we automate your ITGC tasks and implement continuous compliance through like alarms in our technology. Again, it's really technology focused with respect to kind of what we can do. And those things are free. They take very little effort. And at the end of the day, what they show in education, anybody, prospect or customer alike, is just kind of the risks that exist in their environment. And then it's up to the business to kind of respond to those risks. And they can, hopefully use our technology to be a part of that story, or engage specialists like yourselves to be part of that story. But if you go to the website and request those assessments, they're totally free. They don't take they're a pretty light lift, and, you'll get a very good view into your ERP.
Well, as is usually the case with these conversations we have with our guests, time is running out, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface, and we could keep going. So, Brian, I want to thank you for joining us today and appreciate the insights that you've brought, especially coming from the different perspective. And it's even helped a crotchety old guy like me, maybe think twice about dissing on all those auditors I've known through the years. So that's going to wrap us up for today. And as Brian alluded to, you can go directly to the Onapsis website, but you can also go to securityweekly.com/Onapsis and sign up for a free, as in complimentary, assessment of your environment. So thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks for the conversation on the Discord server. Let's do it again next week. Until then, stay safe, stay secure, stay self-isolated.